Well, that's a good question. The fund can, I think it was pointed out earlier, an LPT was analogized to a settlement. And in some respects, that's true. The LPT, or an LPT, is a settlement of sorts, and an owner-operator can settle their claim with the fund right now, David, right? I mean, there's nothing keeping them from doing so. Our understanding of the law is that the fund can transfer liabilities to anybody without their permission. And I'll let the fund representative speak to that. Our position is that we would want those people to be willing participants in any such transfer. And there would be an opt-out provision. If they didn't want to do it, they just sign a form and say, no, I don't want to do it. I want to keep it the way it is. So we don't want to drag anyone kicking and screaming, doing something that they don't want to do. So,
I'm just thinking, let the owners decide, the current owner that's on that site, let them decide.
exactly, and that option would be given to them.
I mean, they could decide today, I don't want to do it, I want to do it this way, and just have some instrument that they could decide yes or no.
Exactly, and James just brought up a point. You do get into situations, in a few of these, you would have where the UST fund claimant is not our policyholder. I think that would be a small amount of that sampling, but where the previous owner and claimant with the UST fund did not transfer or assign the claim to the new owner operator. That happens in some cases. Most times it doesn't.
Tom and Elaine, can you speak to, of the sites that you currently insure that also have an active less claim on there, there's about, I don't know, 20 or so reopeners on their NFA reopeners that you would have in common right now? Can you explain what happens in that process if those are LPT?
I wouldn't say reopeners. I'd say there are 20 sites, give or take, where we have an open, active liability, and that Pmci has an open, active liability, as opposed to the larger universe is where they have some promise to pay if something happens in the future. Those are ones we're actively discussing transferring. That would be common with the group that was transferred in 2007. Is that, yeah. So, and those, that would contain an opt-out or opt-in provision, so that those would only be willing participants who would agree to that. As I mentioned earlier, we would require some sort of release from those claimants, is acknowledging that it's a settlement on their part. You said we've received the last of the, what we've done is gone to the consultants working on the site to get a estimate of their projection to get to closure. We've got our reserves on it. Tom has his reserves on his claims, and we're getting kind of that third-party look for negotiation. That's always a sticking point too, is, what's that dollar amount? So, even if we had all willing participants, if you can't arrive at a supply and demand price, an individual site or on a whole group of sites, that affects that negotiation as well. But yeah, those are ones we're actively, one of the issues associated with why we're pursuing that group is the practicability to bid, whether or not there'd be an interested party. There is no other party that has that open liability on those sites. There are 2 active claims going on. The next step is are there parties who have a promise to pay, or is that promise to pay sufficient to justify not seeking bids on that? So that's kind of that question, but why we are moving ahead with the group that do have shared liability. In fact, just the savings in the administrative costs of 2 people handling, 2 people weighing in on the decision and maybe agreeing or not agreeing, and how to solve that site as a whole, despite the fact that it's 2 releases. having an ongoing mechanism to allow owners to choose one or the other to handle the whole liability is something the board's discussed and been open to in the past as well.
I don't know, in your question, maybe you're asking about how well is it going? There was we referred to it as the mini LPT that occurred in 2007, where I think there were 14 potential sites.
10 transferred,
4 they were given the option, and 10 said yes and 4 said no. So of the 10, and Tom, you might have to correct me, but I think 3 were closed pretty early on, and either 6 or 7 are ongoing right now, still with corrective actions or post-corrective action monitoring. Does that sound right?
Yep.
Okay. And then recently the board approved looking at the transfer of 35 more where there's a common fund claim and Pmci claim, so there's 2 releases at least. So that agreement has not been drafted or negotiated yet, but there was approval to go forward, and I think the board at that time discussed or said that would be, give the owners options, opt-in, opt-out there too. So that's another pilot, I guess you could call it.
Thank you. One last question and then we'll wrap this up. Is there any reason that a responsible party, an owner-operator, should be concerned about an LPT and a potential reopening of an NFA site? Is there any reason that they should be concerned?
It's hard to answer without, you'd have to look at any individual agreement, any individual transfer. We're committed to providing a safety net for DNR for sites that are closed under Rebecca. As long as the fund is there. There are other mechanisms that can be put in place there beyond when the fund sunsets. An insurance policy can be purchased to respond to certain triggers that would provide evaluation once that no further action certificate has been achieved. So, you know, should you be concerned? You should always be concerned that you're reaching no further action is protecting you. We did put the change in the law to make that mean more from DNR. In other words, for that specific release for which the no further action certificate's issued. Again, material misrepresentation or fraud is the reason they can come back once you've shown them you've solved their puzzle. So.
And that applies regardless of whoever's paying for it. So I guess from PMC's perspective, would there be a concern from an owner operator? If the claim was transferred to PMC and we received consideration for the NFA going forward, no, because that claim's if the claim reopens again at some point down the road, regardless if it was fund liability, PMC liability, you know the funding's there. I don't know if you can get more assurance than that. There's always a risk. And if the fund doesn't continue in perpetuity, will there be NFA funding?
Yeah, that's an open question. As part of shutting down, obviously DNR's continued regulation and dealing with risks that may not have been identified will have to be some subject of that. You know, the placing certainty in the law is a part of that, but you know the other part is making sure that they are able. We do know that there will be at least the perception of risk at releases that were closed, and you know making sure they have the ability to address that will be a key part in shutting down the board. Right now we're the safety net and the planned safety net, at least going forward to that sunset.
Great. Well, I would like to thank all of our panelists today. Oh, yeah, Dan.
Global fund, where do we stand today with the global fund update? Is that still in play?
Opt-in claims.
Yeah.
And there's 176 open opt-in claims. What we didn't cover it up here, it's kind of in it's run its course. There are still a few new ones that come in as people find out, but because of the maturity, the opt-in claims were in the mid-90s. Iowa went after oil companies who may have transferred their sites, seeing the writing on the wall for EPA, and was successful in getting many of them to settle with the state. That money went into what is now the Innocent Landowner Fund. As part of that settlement, claimants to the fund were able to opt in to that settlement with the oil companies. In other words, if you had a site and you had an open claim, and it divided sites into two categories, remediation and monitoring only. For monitoring only, you could opt in and receive up to $2,500 of your co-payment back, and you, in exchange for signing a release with the oil company, basically releasing them and saying you individually as a site owner would not sue them. If you're a remediation site, you could receive up to $14,000 of your co-payment reimbursed. We still do pay those claims. If you aren't receiving one on your site, by all means, we can help you ferret out whether you would be eligible. Basically, you had to be show one of the settling oil companies that you could release in the chain on your site as a jobber, as a previous owner, one of those things. On the newer claims, innocent landowner, for the majority of those claims we get in, one of the other changes was waiving of co-payment in 2010. So that was the majority of where we saw new global opt-in claims. So that has slowed to a trickle. So it accomplishes the same thing.
Thank you.
Okay, once again, I'd like to thank our panelists for being here today and apologize for the problems with the projector. We will put all the PowerPoints together. Those of you who are consultants, make sure you have signed the sign-in sheet outside the door so you can get your CEUs. And for those of you who are RPs or anybody else, I guess, who would like to join us, we're going to be heading over to the Capitol, so we'll just meet out into the lobby and walk over there. So, any closing comments here?
I'd just say, we did receive some very specific individual site questions that we'll get answers out to those people we received them from. But if anybody in the room also had any that were specific to their site or a situation, I think most of us plan on sticking around for a little bit to either get the information and get back to you or be able to address it. So.
Great, thank you all very much for coming.